Welcome to Authenticated Access Security Signals, where I try to make sense of this ever-changing, crazy world of cybersecurity in a way that's understandable but has actual, actionable insights. And today I've got some cybersecurity math for you, and unfortunately, this equation isn't great for any of us. So, recent research has put the median time between the disclosure of a vulnerability and the known exploitation of it at around 5 days. Meanwhile, organizations have traditionally built vulnerability management programs around things like a 30-day patch cycle. Now, here's the really uncomfortable part. The latest Verizon DBIR found that the median time to fully remediate known exploited vulnerabilities was actually 43 days. 5 days for the attacker to take advantage of an exploitation, 43 days for the defender to patch that same vulnerability. So you don't have to be a mathematician to figure out who's winning that race and who's definitely losing it. And I also think it's time that we acknowledge something. The traditional enterprise patching model was built for a time and a threat environment that simply doesn't exist anymore. So, for years now, vulnerability management programs have operated on a pretty understandable, repeatable model. A new vulnerability gets disclosed, security evaluates it, IT tests the patch for it, the patch gets approved, a change window gets scheduled, and then the patch gets deployed. Now, maybe critical vulnerabilities got handled faster, but everything else pretty much went into that normal monthly patch cycle. And honestly, that process made sense when we had time, but increasingly, we don't have time to react. I mean, the attackers aren't sitting around waiting for our change control meetings. I mean, they're monitoring disclosures too. They're analyzing patches. They're building their exploits. They're scanning the internet, looking for vulnerable systems. And automation and AI are only making that process faster and fast. In fact, it's now happening at machine speed. And if we look at the latest Verizon research, it says vulnerability exploitation is now responsible for 31% of breaches. That has actually overtaken credential abuse as the leading initial access vector. So this should really change the conversation. I mean, patching isn't just an IT hygiene issue anymore. The velocity at which we can patch vulnerable systems is now a true security control. Now, before someone sends this clip to their infrastructure team and says, Matt says we have 5 days to patch everything. No. Please don't do that, because that's how we create a completely different problem that we don't want to deal with. I don't want to be blamed for. Look, there are tens of thousands of vulnerabilities that are disclosed, and you can't treat every CVE as an emergency. A CVSS 9.8 scored vulnerability sitting on an isolated internal system isn't more dangerous to your organization than a lower scored vulnerability that's sitting on an internet-facing VPN that's actively being exploited. In fact, I would say that those are actually reversed. And that's a change that I think security leaders need to make. We really need to move from vulnerability management to exposure management. What we need to do is start asking questions about these vulnerabilities, like, is our system externally exposed? Is the exploitation of it happening in the wild? Is it in CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog? Is exploit code available out there? What privileges could an attacker gain inside our environment, and what data or systems do we have sitting behind this vulnerability? And most importantly, can an attacker actually reach this vulnerability in our environment? Because severity tells you something about the vulnerability, but exposure tells you something about your risk. So if I had my way, this is probably the biggest operational change I'd make. Stop putting every asset on the same patch cycle. Your employee's workstation and your internet-facing VPN appliance should not necessarily be treated with the same remediation SLA. Your public firewall, your VPN, your remote access infrastructure, your identity infrastructure, your email infrastructure, and externally accessible application, those are the doors into your environment. And when there's credible evidence that attackers are actively exploiting a vulnerability in one of those systems, 30 days is far too long and quite honestly absurd. At that point, we're not talking about routine maintenance. We're talking about an active threat. Your process needs an emergency lane to go much faster. Maybe that means patching. Maybe it means disabling a feature. Maybe it's a new WAF rule. Maybe it's isolation of that system. Or maybe you temporarily remove a service from the internet. The objective here isn't just install the patch. The objective is to remove the exploitable condition, and those are not the same thing. And this is where things can get uncomfortable organizationally. We built change management to reduce operational risk, and that's important. Nobody wants security yelling, patch everything, and then taking down production every Tuesday. Our businesses simply can't operate that way. But there are now situations where the risk of not changing something is dramatically greater than the risk of changing it. But that's not an IT or security decision. That's a business decision. If there's an active exploitation of the VPN technology protecting remote access to your company, waiting 3 weeks for the next maintenance window isn't being conservative, it's being ridiculous. And it may actually be the much riskier choice. Security, infrastructure, application owners, and leadership need to agree before the emergency on what allows an expedited change. You don't want to be inventing that process while someone is actively scanning your perimeter. Now, there's another problem that's hiding underneath all of this. You can't patch something you don't know exists. That forgotten appliance, that server that someone stood up 3 years ago and isn't using and never patched, the subsidiary no one has included in your vulnerability scanning, that new SaaS integration that you've implemented, the old VPN concentrator that's technically still online just in case. Your 5-day exploitation window doesn't matter if it takes you 7 days just to realize that you're vulnerable. And that's why asset visibility and external attack surface management and even vulnerability intelligence increasingly have to operate together. The first question after a major vulnerability drops should be, do we actually have this in our environment? And that answer shouldn't take a week for you to get. In fact, I would say if it takes you a week to get, you're already in trouble. And here's the last piece that people often forget. Deploying a patch isn't the same as removing the vulnerability. Did it deploy everywhere? Did the systems fail after deployment? Did somebody exclude a server? Is there another instance nobody knew about? Did the mitigation actually work? Security programs really have to start closing the loop of discover, prioritize, remediate, and validate. Otherwise, we're right back to something that I've talked about many times before, and that is security theater. A dashboard showing patch deployed isn't the outcome. The outcome is the attacker can no longer exploit that path. And here's my final thoughts. The answer isn't simply patch everything faster. Honestly, that's impossible. The answer is to get dramatically faster at identifying the vulnerabilities that actually matter to your environment. You need to know your attack surface. You need to know what's exposed. You need to use real-world exploitation intelligence. You need to create an emergency remediation path for actively exploited vulnerabilities. And you need to give internet-facing and critical systems much more aggressive timelines. Oh, and validate that the remediations have actually worked. Because the old model essentially said, we'll get to this during our patch cycle, but the modern threat environment is increasingly saying, well, that's fine, but we're going to get there first. Remember, the math is 5 days versus 43 days. And that's not a vulnerability management metric. That's an attacker's head start on breaching your organization. And security leaders need to start treating it that way. All right, now I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree, or maybe you have something that you'd like to add into this mix? Well, please be sure to put it down in the comments below. And also, look, I know everyone asked to please like and subscribe, but please like and subscribe. It'll really help us continue to grow this channel. And if there's a topic that you'd like me to talk about or dive more deeply into, feel free to let me know that as well. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you again next time. Stay safe out there, everyone.